mindfulness, McMindfulness, and Buddhism. So I believe several years ago, mindfulness was the word of the year by various organizations. But how it's used in the West and how it's used in the Buddhist traditions are different, and it's even used differently in different Buddhist traditions. Mindfulness in the West is often associated with, at least as it's applied in psychology, stress reduction, reducing anxiety, depression, regulation, and then can also be about using mindfulness to be more effective at work or to be more effective at maybe a destructive job. I gave the example of snipers earlier, and it's really missing some of the core points of Buddhism, that it's a part of a longer journey towards liberation of self and others. It's part of one's compassion emergence, I would say, and it's really connected to ethics. If we think about the Eightfold Path, this is a foundation from which we have right action or right speech, or how what we should do in the world. It's not about just paying attention and symptom reduction. It's about engagement in service to lessening the suffering of others, and has become more centralized, the suffering of our planet and the world in some way. I've always been fascinated with the ideas around compassion, thinking in the many counseling traditions, but the humanistic tradition, starting out that as if compassion is just given, that everyone who practices therapy will have compassion in some way. And I think the research has shown that that is not true, and compassion can be a skill that is built upon. And I've always debated in the West, it's the whole discourse around mirror neurons, that we have to experience empathy and compassion for that to get hardwired, and the arguments that is actually not true, and that becoming a compassionate person is this, as in the West, developmental models, including self-psychology and Kohut, it's the relational experiences that bring this forth. First, say in some traditions of Buddhism, say Tibetan Buddhism, there's this idea of basic goodness or brilliant sanity, that compassion is always there, and that as we clear away the distortions and the clouds and the busyness, compassion arises. I feel like I'm not a good case example personally, because I feel like I've had some developmental compassion from my childhood, and misattunement and lack of compassion, but also through my many, many years of treatment as a client. And then I also have tried to practice Buddhism as a lay Buddhist for many, many decades. I think it's of note that sometimes less so now, but I would have the experience of feeling compassion for someone who I really disliked, or who had wronged me, or my view that they had wronged me in some way. And I found it very unnerving, as it went against some of my early training in the importance of holding grudges and the jouissance that one can have of holding on to anger in some way. So when we're talking about mindfulness, even within Buddhism, I feel like this isn't in any way universal in some way. I can think of, just to do a very beginning change exploration of mindfulness, I can think of maybe two of the more popular Buddhist teachers. One would be Thich Nhat Hanh in the Vietnamese Zen tradition, and then let's say Pema Chodron from the more Tibetan Buddhist Shambhala tradition. So I think they both agree that we're trying to have direct awareness of our sense experiences, including our bodies in some way. We're moving towards non-judgmental observation, that this practice of meditation, mindfulness, will and can lead to insight and reductions of suffering, and that the idea of mindfulness practice is that we bring it into our everyday life. So often you'll hear about the four foundations of mindfulness. And I mean, for Thich Nhat Hanh, I think the descriptions, and I'm guessing this tradition, the experience is that mindfulness is actually calming and nurturing. He talks about kind of a tender recognition that we can have with our thoughts and our narratives in some way. Often this is paired with the development of loving kindness and loving kindness meditations in some ways. And as they contrast that against, say, Pema Chodron, is that really it's a little bit more of a disciplined effort of noticing when we go away and come back without the as much emphasis on tenderness and more emphasis on recognition. Although, of course, in practicing meditation or mindfulness, self-judgment and punitive behavior, just as we see in the behavioral research, doesn't work in some way. And that in this Tibetan tradition, it's not really about being calm. It's about getting in touch with the raw textures of human experiences. We're aiming to kind of see through our thoughts and our delusions, not necessarily be comforted by them, although that may happen over time. Where Thich Nhat Hanh in that tradition may focus on compassion, the Tibetan tradition may focus more on kind of seeing through ego destruction. Maybe that's too strong of a word in some way. It's to expose our minds and to penetrate our thoughts and to be closer to the world, our place in the world, and even the interconnectedness and the emptiness of things arising and passing away, and the discomfort of impermanence, more than this soothing that we may find in the Thich Nhat Hanh tradition. But mindfulness has come to the West, and this is done by many serious Western psychological teachers. Maybe the first one would be John Kabat-Zinn, who applied it first for stress and kind of developed programs. And there's Alan Marlette's mindful relapse prevention, and we talked about DBT earlier. But while in Buddhism, the idea is service to others and increased ethical behavior in our lives, and mindfulness as applied in psychological approaches is really less about ethics, generally speaking. In the West, mindfulness may be about treating some kind of symptom. It can be used and misunderstood as towards self-improvement or optimization, and can be used towards kind of adapting to our environments and to our potentially unjust environments. Where I would think in the Buddhist tradition, it's about ethics, it's about liberation of self and others, and it can be engaged about questioning and working with the causes of suffering that can also be systemic. So some things that have been very interesting to me is that in these Western psychological models, and I've had to teach a variety of these mindfulness CBT groups in the various jobs I've held, is that the leaders of these groups have really very limited experience or practice with the more traditional hours and hours of meditation that we would do in Buddhism, and the ongoing contemplations and discussions and challenges and deconstructing our thoughts. And it's more about some of these self skills of sustained attention and being able to detect distraction, kind of redirect our focus, our intentions, to be able to greater shift from one behavior or ego state or affective state or thought narrative to another. And generally in the West, there's lots of various definitions, but they break mindfulness into these elements of non-judgment about our thoughts, what's happening, ourselves, others, acceptance. And this is going from maybe John Kabat-Zinn and Bishop and some of these classic Western mindfulness researchers. So we're not judging, we're accepting what is arising. We're not being reactive to what is arising. We are observing it. We are open to what is arising. We're even curious about it, and potentially even having some compassion about it. And what has been most fascinating to me is that when you look at the research on mindfulness groups with people with much less experience in mindfulness training, less rigorous training in this way, it seems that they teach these mindfulness skills often read and adjusted from a manualized script that's from that treatment approach for that challenge that people may have. Is that often in the research there's some scales that are used about mindfulness. Some of these scales might be the 5-factor mindfulness questionnaire or mindfulness attention scale or the Toronto scale. And it seems as if on the Western models, there is improvement in the people who goes through the program's experience of mindfulness. So the debate in this topic is this just appropriation, that we're really taking what at its heart is about compassion, a non-dual world view, service to the world and others, and putting it into the West into self-improvement, self-optimization, not deep exploration and contemplation of the nature of reality, the nature of mind, but very focused on just helping people suffer less. So in taking away potentially the ethical elements of it. I don't know if I want to answer this question. I mean, mindfulness programs do help people suffer less, and maybe an opening towards deeper contemplations in some way. But I do concerned about how it may be used for non-benevolent purposes in some way. So I'm currently in this program after 40 plus years of practice of training to be a meditation instructor, which has never been an interest of mine. It's almost an employment requirement on my part. But in thinking about my approach with mindfulness in group psychotherapy, is that really the foundations of mindfulness are often very simple: paying attention to one's breath, noticing one's sense experiences or what one feels. Right, I'm thinking of some of these mindfulness-based interventions that we do in the mindfulness parts of Western psychology, manualized treatments, or listening, hearing things, or feeling the weight of something, or noticing the colors and being with it. And when we get distracted, coming back to this. So many ways of practicing mindfulness towards the symptom reduction, self-optimization outside of extended periods of meditation, slowing down, and deeply examining our own minds and how this creates the narratives and our views and our behavior in the world with other people. So a mistake I've made in my groups is bring in thinking about, some kind of psychoanalytic, personal growth, relational healing, more depth psychological ideas than just symptoms of becoming a friend to yourself, being better with others in relationships, working more collaboratively. Is that while in learning about how to become a meditation instructor, it's much slower and longer, and there's kind of one object of mindfulness or meditation. And I think in my groups, I'm often putting in many ideas that people can pay attention to, what they're feeling, what's happening in their bodies, what are they thinking? Is this an old thought? Is this a repetitive thought? Even exploring why this thought's coming up now, or why this feeling's coming up now, or what might be their impulse or pattern to do in this moment. Why might they have that impulse? Is this historical from their family? Is this historical from some kind of socio-cultural narrative that's going on around them and that they've learned to do, and that when someone cries, you hand them tissues, or all these automatic sociocultural behaviors that we are engaged in? And is that too much for too many mindfulness instructions, too many awareness instructions for people who are in my groups? I think I'm lucky that I, at least these days, work with a lot of people with a lot of who've been through many years of their own treatment and who have potentially practiced some form of spiritual path or mindfulness or Buddhism, and they seem like they're, I'll have to explore this with them, somewhat able to hold these multiple awarenesses in their minds in some way. Right? There's a saying that a advanced monk can hold 100 detailed Tonka paintings in their mind simultaneously. Now, I'm not asking my group members to do this, but I think I am asking them to come back to the here and now experience, both of their thoughts, feelings, somatic reactions, but also extending that to consideration of others, their experience of others, and towards this empathy, what might others be experiencing in some manner. So this would be some ideas of what maybe a Buddhist inspired group would look like, is to have these various awarenesses that we hold and work on over time and develop, and notice when we get off and come back. And I have a very bad habit of a group leader that when someone is apparently quiet or giving signs of physical disassociation for an extended period, I may invite them in to say what they were experiencing, what they were feeling, what they were thinking about, with this non-judgmental idea that whatever it was, it's fine. They're not in trouble for getting distracted or getting lost or going on tangents in the group. One of the ways mindfulness in Buddhism has shifted, say, from some of my earlier analytic views, is that oftentimes in analytic groups, the idea is that we're regressing, we're being extremely spontaneous, We might even be talking with affects that we're intensifying, and you can see this in various, I think of Gestalt, and whether that's beneficial to do in a group with others, or is it better to be aware of these impulses, these thoughts, these feelings, these affects, and talk about them. And inevitably, given the situations of group, you can't always reflect. And I think always having people reflect on their internal experience and experiences of others' thoughts and feelings, somatic sensation, and impulses could really, really stifle a group. It could become a Quaker meeting where we all sit around in silence until something hits us and inspired. So these are just ongoing dilemmas, perhaps back and forth, some of each. I think of folks that we might have a spontaneous moment in group, potentially a regressive moment in group. This could be seen kind of as the out breath in meditation, and then on the in breath, we might take a moment to reflect. So this is what happens in group. There are relationship experience, there are enactments, there are patterns that get played out, and then there is time to reflect on what happened, try to understand it, try to learn from it, try to expand from these experiences, and back and forth as a meditation, an out breath of enactment, and then an in breath of contemplating it. So let me stop there for now.